Hi guys, it's Michelle with Deception Bytes, and I'm back again for the second part of the last video that I did. The last part was part, 20. So this is going to be 20B because the one post was just too big to get to everything. It had some explosive information in it, and this next one will as well. At least it will be explosive if you've never heard this before. Now, let me just say something right here. I had several comments on the last video that I did, 20. The one with Hitler on it. Okay, if you are going to deny that the Holocaust happened, then I'm going to erase you. It's not because I'm Jewish or Luciferian, as some of the comments suggested. It's because I've studied this for a very long time, and I've known people that were rescued from the Holocaust as children. I've seen testimonies of people that have escaped. There's just too much evidence. There is a boatload of evidence that this went on. None of the governments in the world discount the fact that this happened. There are pictures, there are movies, there's the documentation is astounding. So honestly, if you're going to deny that the Holocaust happened, this is not the video for you. You need to go find another channel, because I'm not going to even entertain that. And I'm not going to entertain the idea either that every Jewish person is evil, because they're not. So I'm not saying that there isn't such a thing as Zionism. I know that there is. However, I'm not going to go there. So there we go. So having said that, if you're still listening and you still want to hear what I have to say, then wonderful. And again, if I could be wrong in any of this. Now, somebody pointed out the fact of the picture of Angela Merkel, and that she would have been too old to have had her picture taken with Hitler at that time. Now, I did go back and look at that because I thought about it at the time, but then I uploaded the video anyway without looking into it. And I shouldn't have done that, because that person was completely right and I'm wrong, and I apologize. That picture is obviously a hoax, but don't negate the fact that Merkel could be Hitler's daughter, because obviously Q wants us to believe that, because the questioning led in that direction. So whether or not you believe it, whether or not I believe it, Q believes it and wants us to believe it. So that's where we're leaving it. I'm not saying any of this stuff that I'm saying is the absolute truth, because I don't know. As far as I'm doing my best in terms of researching, but I miss things. I'm human, and that's why it takes us all. So thank you to that person that brought it up. They were very polite in doing so, and I left the comment there, and they are completely correct in assuming that picture was fake, and I do apologize. So let's continue on now, having said all that. And 99% of the comments that I receive are very, very sweet. Like I've said before, I think I have some of the sweetest listeners on YouTube. I really do. And I really appreciate you all. Okay, now where we left off last time was with the Titanic. So that's where we're going to pick up. And just to kind of refresh your memory, Q asked who died on the Titanic, and the three, obviously a lot of people died on the Titanic, but he is leading us towards these three very wealthy people: Benjamin Guggenheim, Isa Strauss, actual name is Isidor Strauss, and David Astor. What year did the Titanic sink? It sank in 1912. Why is this relevant? Well, first of all, Q is going to tell us why it's relevant, but just to cut that down a little bit, it's relevant because a year later the Federal Reserve came into being, and there is a theory, and obviously Q aspires to that theory, that the men that drowned on the Titanic, three of the richest men in the world, David Astor, of course, was the richest man in the world at that time, that they opposed the establishment of the Federal Reserve. And sure enough, a year later, the Federal Reserve came into being. Now, whether or not that's fact, I don't know, but it's certainly not within the realm, not outside of the realm of possibility, and obviously Q is wanting us to believe that. So since these posts are about Q and not about what we actually think, then this is what Q is wanting us to believe. So I don't know. I had never heard that before. It was explosive information to me. I have studied a lot about the Titanic because it's a very interesting story, and it's interesting that, you know, there's just a lot of stuff interesting about it, and we're going to get into that. So I'm going to try not to get off on my little tangents. What exactly happened to the Titanic? Well, it's reported that it hit an iceberg, but obviously Q is, his questioning is leading us to believe that that was not necessarily so. Now, after reading a bit about how it was constructed and so forth, and I'm having my doubts as well. But again, it's not about my doubts and what I think, it's about what Q thinks. So Q does not think it was hit by an iceberg. So we're going to have to go with that. And I can understand where that idea came from. And we're assuming, too, that Q has information into sources and so forth that we don't have. So there you go. What class of people were guaranteed a lifeboat? Well, as you know, the Titanic sailed without adequate lifeboats. I think there was only 30% capacity for the lifeboats, and some of those lifeboats, like 30% of the boat, of the entire ship, the passengers on the ship could get in a lifeboat. That was the only amount of lifeboats provided, which really was against the law. But they sailed without enough lifeboats, and I can't remember the whole story about that, but I remember reading about it several years ago. And excuse me, I still have something happening with my throat here. So now, in terms of the lifeboats, a lot of those lifeboats, even though there was only 30% of the ship, if every lifeboat had been set sail with full capacity, only 30% of the ship would have been saved. However, a lot of those lifeboats sailed, the first lifeboats, because everybody kept thinking, well, it's better to stay on the ship than get out, off into this little tiny boat in these big waves and freezing cold waters. And I could understand that, because I think that if I had been there, I would have been the same way. I would not have been one of the first ones in the lifeboat. I would have been, I think I'll take my chances on getting rescued. But it was, of course, as the ship started sinking and people realized that, hey, this really is going to go down, everybody started scrambling for the lifeboats. However, excuse me, I'm going to take a drink of water, see if that helps. Sorry, I know that's very annoying. So let me see. Now, as the ship was going down and they realized, hey, this is going to sink, everybody started scrambling for the lifeboats. However, that ship was the very first of its kind that could be hermetically sealed. The decks could be hermetically sealed. So if you were in one of the lower decks, you could be sealed down there and could not get up. And that's exactly what happened. The people in the lower decks were sealed, and they couldn't get up, and they all perished, especially the people from the lowest class, which would have been the very bottom of the ship. I'm not sure if any of them survived, maybe one or two, but it was rare for them to survive. So what Q is getting at here is that what class of people were guaranteed a lifeboat? Well, the elite, the first class, and they paid a lot of money for their ticket, and these were, when we talk about the elite, these were the elite of the elite, because not just anyone could afford a ticket on that. Now, I think I've got, oh, okay, I don't think this is it. Just one second. One second, I think I read that on the last one, so we won't go there. But what I do want to do is I want to get to these ticket prices because I think this is interesting. Ticket prices for the Titanic, if you were to buy a ticket today at a rate of 1.52 US dollars per British pound, a first class suite, now that would be the elite of the elite, first class suite would be £49,642 or $75,788.44. So you can see what I'm saying here. Even if you were well off, not many people could afford to blow $75,000 on a ticket. Like even in today's money, I mean, that's a lot of money. Yeah, that's just not something that every person, even if they had a really wonderful job, could drop that kind of money. Now, first class berth was £1,712 or $2,613.71. That's a little bit more reasonable. I could see if people that were doing well would have been able to afford that. I've spent probably close to that on a ticket before, on a plane ticket, so it's possible. Second class, £684 or $1,044.26. And that's not that much money. In today's terms, it is a lot of money. It's not just everybody that can drop $1,000 on a ticket, but it's more reasonable. Third class would be $171 to £456 or $261.07 to $696.17. Now you realize that the people that would be the economy class of that day, and those people probably had a very hard time even coming up with that much money, because even some of the poorest of the poor today would have trouble coming up with that money. So that's just kind of shows you what the tickets prices were like, and it shows you that not everybody would be dropping that money on a first class suite. Now, who was specifically invited? Now, I can't find this information. I've looked and looked and looked and looked. I've tried Googling to see if those people that died, the rich people that died, if any of them had been invited. I think that is what Q is getting at, but I don't know. But Q then tells us less than 10. So there were less than 10 people that were specifically invited on the ship. Now, who those 10 people are, I don't know. Now, next question is, what is the Fed? Well, that's the Federal Reserve Bank. Okay, this, I shouldn't have put this here because it really shouldn't be here, but we're going to get to that. Let me see. Okay. The last chance to thwart the European plan to establish a central bank in the United States ended on April 14th, 1912, with the deliberate sinking of the RMS Titanic by British agents that killed one of the order's members named Major Archibald Willingham, but along with the American business tycoon John Jacob Astor IV, Benjamin Guggenheim, and Isidor Straus, who were returning to the United States from Great Britain after what they believed was a successful negotiation with the Rothschilds to leave America alone under threat of war. With the last obstacles removed from creating a central bank in the United States with the sinking of the Titanic, the European banking powers forced through the American legal system what is known as the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, which, once enacted and remains to this day, became the sole and complete authority over the United States economy, forcing the American people into 2 world wars and countless other conflicts during the past 97 years, all designed with one single purpose: to create for Europe's royal families a new world order controlled by them. So there's a little bit of background. Now, I'm going to get into something very interesting here. And hopefully I have more down here about this, but it has been purported that J.P. Morgan switched, and now J.P. Morgan owned the Titanic. Okay, he was the person that financed it. He owned it. J.P. Morgan switched the names of the severely damaged Olympic with its twin, the Titanic. Now, The Olympic was severely damaged in port, and it was, I believe, it was damaged by I think an army vessel, if I'm not mistaken, and I could be, but it was severely damaged and it could not be insured. It was insured, but for some reason the insurance wouldn't cover this. So the Titanic and the Olympic were sister ships. Now, to my knowledge, the Titanic was a little bit, upper class because it was newer, of course, but they were sister ships. They were laid out the exact same. Now, all to purposefully sink the Titanic, really Olympic, in order to claim $12 million in insurance money, start the Federal Reserve, and avoid bankruptcy of the White Star Shipping Company. The Titanic, Olympic, was deliberately sunk to drown the opposition to the Federal Reserve in 1912, and on 1913, the Federal Reserve was created, and then... Sorry, I copied this from somewhere, and they have very bad grammar. And then, in 1914, World War I started, financed on both sides... I'm sorry, I'm an English major, what can I say? Financed on both sides by the federal, I'm sorry, I drive myself crazy. I know, I'm the grammar police. On both sides by the federal bank by making money out of thin air in order to build a new world order. So, there was the Olympic and there was the Titanic. Both ships were pretty much identical, except, of course, the Titanic was all new. Now, the Olympic was damaged in port, and for some reason the insurance was not going to cover that. So they wanted to sink the Titanic because they wanted to drown the opposition to the Federal Reserve. So J.P. Morgan, being the businessman that he is, thinks, maybe I could switch the Titanic with the Olympic and sink that instead. Then we could call the Titanic the Olympic and still have our ship, but the damaged one we could get the insurance money for. So apparently that's what they did, and there is strong evidence for that. I thought that was ridiculous when I first heard it until I saw some of the evidence out there. And I would encourage you, if you're interested, to go out and look at some of the evidence. What they did is they actually switched names and everything. They paid people to come in the night and switch, and the damaged linoleum in the Olympic was replaced with carpet. So anyway, that's a long story, and we would be here all day if I got into all that, but it's very interesting. Now, let me see. Cannot locate. Oh, crap, because that was such a good link. Dang, I hate when that happens. Oh, dang, I really wanted you to see that because it showed how the Fed works. Okay, what does the Fed control? Well, they make money and they control the interest rate, among other things. Who controls the Fed? Private banks. Who approved the formation of the Fed? Congress. Congress approved it. Why did Hollywood glorify Titanic as a tragic love story? Well, the only reason I can think of is to perhaps cover the real story. I don't know. I don't know why they glorified the Titanic as a tragic love story, but I love the movie. So I've seen it several times and I still love it. So anyway, who lived in the movie? What man? Now, I am not sure who he's getting at here because I have looked and compared the people that were in the movie to people that were really on the ship, and I still don't understand who Q is getting at here. But I don't know. If you know, please let me know because it's driving me crazy. I have literally driven myself crazy trying to find the answer to that. Why is this relevant? Well, I don't know why it's relevant because I don't know the answer. But Q tells us the opposite is true. So whoever this man is that lived in the movie really didn't live. So I don't know. Now, I thought at first it might have been the fiance of Rose, but that was not a real man. That was just a composite character. So I don't know. Anyway, let me see what else I have here of interest. Okay. I meant to do this last night after I finished the first one, but I was just absolutely bagged. So I'm doing it today when I'm much more rested. Okay. The Federal Reserve banks are not a part of the federal government, but they exist because of an act of Congress. Their purpose is to serve the public. So is the Fed private or public? The answer is both. While the Board of Governors is an independent government agency, the Federal Reserve banks are set up like private corporations. Member banks hold stock in the Federal Reserve banks and earn dividends. Holding this stock does not carry with it the control and financial interest given to holders of common stock in for-profit organizations. The stock may not be sold or pledged as collateral for loans. Member banks also appoint 6 of the 9 members of each bank's board of directors. So that's who owns the Federal Reserve. And let's go back here. Okay. Now, this is interesting. It's kind of a little bit off topic, but hey, I don't think you guys mind because it's all still related. So this is very, very interesting. I had heard this before, but not in this detail. So, Mr. W.T. Stead had described his own sad fate. Okay, now, I'm not sure if this tells that Astor, John Jacob Astor, and this man, W.T. Stead, were found clinging to an overturned life raft. They were both dead. They had life belts on that were keeping them afloat, even though they were dead. So it's interesting because it's been speculated, how did these 2 men end up both clinging to each side of this lifeboat? And you'll wonder the same thing when you hear this coincidence. The tale written in tale written 1892, Victim of the Titanic pictures a collision between a steamship of the White Star Line and an iceberg. April 22nd, 1912. Intimate friends in this country of William T. Stead of London recalled yesterday a story which he himself wrote in the Christmas extra issue of the Review of Reviews, in London, published in December 1892, entitled From the Old World to the New, a chapter of which tallies in almost every detail with the wreck of the Titanic. Now, this person, Mr. Stead, William T. Stead, was a reporter, but more than that, he was more than a reporter, but that was one of his jobs anyway. So he writes this in this Review of Reviews, which is published in December 1892, and it's entitled From the Old World to the New. Now, this is interesting, and it describes what will happen with the Titanic. So how did he know? Now, Mr. Stead, in this chapter, which is called Confident and Clairvoyance, described an encounter with icebergs at sea. His characters are a group of English tourists on their way to the Chicago World's Fair. They are crossing the Atlantic on board the Majestic of the White Star Line. The steamship suddenly comes upon a great iceberg. The great English writer, long known for his ideas on spiritualism, clairvoyance, and mental telepathy, brings all into play in this thrilling story of the high sea I hate bad grammar, I'm sorry. When he describes the icebergs, fog, and conditions of sky and sea and on board the Majestic, it would seem that he had been able to send an account of what took place last Sunday evening. It could not have been more identical. This is very poorly written. I did not write this. Anyway, Jack Compton, A passenger has the power of romantic writing. Compton receives a telepathic okay, so the person in this is so poorly written that it's hard to even ascertain what he's saying, but Jack Compton is a passenger on board this fictional story, and has the power of romantic writing. Compton receives a telepathic message from John Thomas, a Scotchman who is an old friend, that he, Thomas, has been saved in the wreck of the Montrose, which was in collision with an iceberg. Meanwhile, Mr. Compton has asked the captain of the Majestic to stop at the icebergs on arrival. The old captain scoffs at the idea, but when his own vessel comes within a hair's breadth of being wrecked by an iceberg, he stops Compton and the professor put out in a lifeboat and eventually reach John Thomas, finding him almost dead. They bring him to safety to the Majestic, just as it seemed the steamship would go under. The setting of the story and the descriptions of the iceberg and the wreck tally with the tragedy of Sunday night. The time and place also agree with those of last Sunday's catastrophe. Now they're talking about the Titanic, of course. It also was on a vessel of the White Star Line, and the captain had under his care just 2,000 souls and a cargo worth at least $2 million. Perhaps the only difference was that Mr. Stead's mental telepathy has been replaced by wireless telepathy. Then dense fog filled the air, wrote Mr. Steed. You breathed it and swallowed it. On deck all was strained attention. The captain on the bridge kept constant lookout. Every half-minute the fog whistle boomed its great voice into the fog. Sometimes, as from far-away distance, they heard the boom of another foghorn, but they could see nothing. At the bows the deck lookout peered into impenetrable mist, and the quartermaster posted to the leeward and lowered the thermometer in a little canvas bag, it should be, to test the temperature. Now, this is interesting because, okay, he's saying that this listed on the leeward side. And it's interesting because I was reading that the Olympic, when it was damaged, listed on the leeward side. And you do have eyewitness accounts from on the Titanic saying that when it left port, some people felt that it was listing on the leeward side. So, what a coincidence. I mean, seriously, this is a huge coincidence. First of all, this person is writing about this story before it even happened. Second of all, you've got the Titanic listing on the leeward side, not because there was anything wrong with the Titanic, but because it had been switched with the Olympic, which had been damaged. Interesting. The terror of the sea described. Then Mr. Stead has one of his characters describe one of these terrors of the sea. Icebergs are mountains of ice floating about in the sea, he says. Ice, does not sink in water. The icebergs float just a little above the surface. All the rest is below. These icebergs are born in Greenland. The snow falls on the highland as it does not melt, and ever more and more snow falls. The great mass presses the lowest snow downward and ever towards the sea. Thus glaciers are formed, slowly moving solid rivers of frozen and solidified snow. When the glacier pushes its way into the sea, its end breaks off, tumbles over into the water with a noise like thunder, and becomes an iceberg. The glaciers are constantly making icebergs. The icebergs drift slowly away into the sea. Sometimes they get caught by frost and are winter-bound. When summer comes, they drift off again into the current, which carries them southward. A whole archipelago of icebergs will sometimes sail southward right across the ocean route to America. It is the greatest danger in the voyage, for the icebergs bring fog with them, and the fogs hide the icebergs until the steamer is close upon them. Imagine a country as big as Ireland without lighthouses, foghorns, or any other beacons, suddenly towed across the path of a steamer and then enveloped in a dense frost fog, and then you can imagine what the danger is. The fatal moment of collision. Hark! What was that? Mr. Steed has a voyager ask here, and his description of what took place goes on. There was a sound as if the steamer were crashing through ice and the screws were churning away amid the ice blocks. The passengers felt their way cautiously to the deck. It was wet and clammy and bitterly cold. Every half minute the fog whistle blew. The crashing of the floe ice against the sides of the ship and the clamping of the ice under the screws made it difficult to speak so as to be heard. Then there came a cry, "Icebergs on the starboard!" The engine bell rang. The engines slowed down in their speed. The steamer steered a trifle more to the southward, but still kept pounding her way onward. The captain could only see ghostly shadows looming darkly to the northward. He pointed to the great flotilla of icebergs. Behind the steamer, the fog was as thick as a blanket. On the north stretched the dazzling array of icebergs, ever shifting and moving. Now and again, a great berg would capsize with a reverberant roar. The captain was cowed. There was something uncanny and awesome about the incident. He had seen icebergs before, but he had seldom had such good luck as to pass clear by the southern edge of a floe and then have a clear sky. The Majestic was now once again driving ahead at full speed. All the passengers were on deck, eyeing the novel and majestic spectacle. Later, in the telling rescue of the castaways in the lifeboat, Mr. Steed writes, "Denser and denser grew the fog, but they could see the Majestic right before them, and in another moment they were alongside. Just as they reached the ship, they heard a long roar like the reverberation of part of artillery. And then the water heaved violently and dashed the lifeboat heavily against the sides of the Majestic. There was a moment of agonizing suspense. No one knew whether the displacement in the iceberg might not lead to a sudden upheaval of the iceberg under the keel of the Majestic. Then the boat's crew were brought safely to deck. Striking sentences here and there from other writings of Mr. Steed are also recalled, in which he had had some premonition of his own fate. Especially is this so of a companion in his book, How I Know the Dead Return, which was a paragraph beginning, "Let us consider the Atlantic Ocean as the grave." Then the author compares on shore with earth and the other with the eternal shore. Now, that's a coincidence, okay? No doubt about it. But the fact that he wrote that and then actually died in the Titanic, what are the odds? Seriously. That's just creepy. So it's very odd. And even in that story, this ship called the Majestic in the story, which of course was the Titanic, went down in the Atlantic Ocean off the shore of Newfoundland, which is exactly where the Titanic went down. So, and let me tell you, that water is frigid. So, it's I don't even know what to say about it. I just had never heard this before, and to me, it was absolutely unbelievably astounding. Now, let's see what else we can find here. Now, books and articles by William T. Stead. A closer look at the essays and works of William T. Stead proves highly illuminating. From them, one learns that Stead, as an editor of William Astor's publications, the Pall Mall Magazine and Pall Mall Gazette, was acting largely as the mouthpiece or propaganda agent of the Astor family in their circle at Cliveden. These beliefs were highly nationalistic to the point of racism. Specifically, they assert a belief that the Anglo-Saxons are a superior race that deserve to rule the world. The political platform of this secretive group includes creating a United States of Europe, which is essentially what happened when the European Union was formed. The religious beliefs of Stead and the Cliveden set contained a liberal dose of spiritualism, occultism, theosophy, and general adherence to the overall beliefs of synarchy or cynicism. One may therefore speculate that there is some connection between this group and the occultists of England and France, specifically the Order of the Golden Dawn and Aleister Crowley, who visited Cairo only a year or two before Astor's trip in 1912. The visit to Cairo, Egypt, made by Colonel Jacob Astor's entourage just prior to the arrival at Cherbourg, France, and their departure on board the RMS Titanic. That's where they departed from, Cherbourg, France. Now, the Titanic departed from several, like they picked up people at several ports, but that's where John Jacob Astor got on. And their departure on board the RMS Titanic, which was I'm sorry, my lips are tripping over themselves. The visit to Cairo, Egypt, made by Colonel John Jacob Astor's entourage just prior to their arrival at Cherbourg, France, and their departure on board the RMS Titanic was very likely an extension of the Astor family's ongoing obsession with Egypt, Egyptian religion, Egyptian excavation, and Egyptian grave robbing under the guise of an artistic interest in artifacts. The Astor family had a special interest in the pharaoh Akhenaten, and this interest is clearly reflected in two stories William Waldorf Astor caused to be published in the Pall Mall magazine, most likely read and copy edited by William T. Stead. References to those stories are included below, and I don't see them, but that's all right. Now, interesting, and I think that you would have to agree. So let's go back here. And why is this relevant? Well, again, we don't know, because we don't know what man Q is referring to here. And he says opposite is true. What is brainwashing? Well, brainwashing is to make someone, a person, adopt radically different beliefs by using systematic and often forcible pressure. So that's what brainwashing is. What is a PSYOP? Well, a PSYOP, psychological operations, also called PSYOP, are planned operations to convey selected information and indicators to audiences to influence their emotions, motives, and objective reasoning, and ultimately the behavior of governments, organizations, groups, and individuals. Let me read that again. Psychological operations, also known as PSYOP, are planned operations to convey selected information and indicators to audiences to influence their emotions, motives, and objective reasoning, and ultimately the behavior of governments, organizations, groups, and individuals. What happened to the Hindenburg? Well, seems that there's some conspiracy stuff surrounding that as well, and I think that's what Q is getting at. The latest evidence surrounding the Titanic sinking and the Hindenburg burning has exposed both disasters for what they are: premeditated destructions similar to the 9/11 World Trade Tower demolitions of 2001. These tragic events help steer all future transportation developments towards inferior petroleum-powered mechanisms, making both the Titanic and the Hindenburg part of one sinister plan. So there could have been more than one reason the Titanic went down. Because they wanted to steer the world towards petroleum-powered mechanisms. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. I'm not saying I believe this because I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. Obviously, if Q is saying what really happened to the Hindenburg, then we don't have the right story. Or according to Q, we don't have the right story. And probably the fact that he's just talked about brainwashing and PSYOP, that's probably what he's referring to in terms of the Hindenburg. That we believe, because we saw pictures, that, there was a spark and it blew up. But we don't really know that. So there you go. Who died during the accident? And I'm not sure. And notice he put accident in quotation marks. So obviously Q does not feel this was an accident. And I'm not sure who Q is referring to here. If you know, please let me know, because I've went through the passenger list and the list of people that died, obviously, because he's asking who died. And I can't find anything that jumps out at me. But I don't know everything. So maybe if you're all curious and want to go out and find the list of people that died in that accident, maybe you'll see something that I'm not seeing. And that's quite possibly so. Why is this relevant? I'm not sure why it's relevant, but I'm pretty sure that it is. What are sheep? Well, sheep is a derogatory term that highlights the passive herd behavior of people easily controlled by a governing power which likens them to sheep, a herd animal that is easily led about. The term is used to describe those who voluntarily acquiesce to a suggestion without critical analysis or research, in large part because the majority of others possess a similar mindset. WordSpy defines it as people who are meek, easily persuaded, and tend to follow the crowd. Merriam-Webster defines the term as people who are docile, compliant, or easily influenced, people likened to sheep. And we know that most people will come home from their jobs and they'll sit in front of the news and they'll watch it and they'll believe what they're told. Most people. And that is a sheep mentality because you're not questioning, you're not processing. And we all know that the television has a certain flicker rate that puts us into, I think it's a beta mode in our brain, the brain waves into beta mode. And so we're more easily, suggestions go more easily, we're more easily hypnotized, and we're more open to suggestions. So that's part of it. But the other thing is that we just don't, after working a full day too, a lot of people, they just don't have the mental capacity to be dissecting what they're hearing. And so they're sitting in front of a TV, they're tired, they're probably hungry, they've, this flicker rate is going at a rate that is putting their brain waves into a state that is readily open to suggestion, and they just take what they hear. And it is understandable to a certain extent, but we are responsible for what we hear, and we are responsible for taking what we hear and checking it out. And that's what we're doing here. That's precisely what we're doing. And it's not that I think I have all the answers. I know I don't have all the answers. And I have got a lot of guidance and a lot of answers from you all, from your comments. So anyway, who controls the narrative? Well, I would say whoever is in control. If we're talking about mainstream media, then we know that the most of mainstream media is predominantly left Democrats, left-wing Democrats. I think it's only, it's under 10% of the people in media are Republican. So we know that the mainstream media is going to spout that rhetoric from the left. Now, also, we know that there are CIA operatives in the media. We've been told that. I think it's been obvious for a very long time, but it seems like it's coming out mainstream now. So that would be my answer. The truth would put 99% of the people in the hospital. That's quite the statement. It's quite the statement. So Q is saying that if we really knew the truth of what was happening in the world and the truth behind some of these things that we accept as history, that 99% of us would have to be hospitalized. Now, Q says it must be controlled. Now, he says Snow White. And this is my, it should be in red. Q didn't say that. I said Snowden, NSA. And I think it's pretty clear to me at this point, after having gone through all these, that that's who he's talking about there. Iron Eagle. Again, I talked about this in the last video, but I'll touch on it again in case there's somebody listening that didn't watch the last video. Iron Eagle is a movie. It was made in 1986. The basis of the fictional story in the film relates to real-life attacks by the United States against Libya over the Gulf of Sidra, in particular, the 1981 Gulf of Sidra incident. So, What Q is exactly getting at there, I'm not sure, except he's telling us that this is important to whatever he is disclosing here. Then he goes to Jason Bourne, and again, this was in the last video, but I'll touch on it again. Jason Bourne, because he obviously feels that it's important because he keeps coming back to it. Jason Bourne, and of course there are several Bourne movies, so in order for us to understand which Jason Bourne he's talking about, he tells us that it's the one that contains CIA/Dream. Now, that would be the 2016 movie. And this is interesting because this movie has Aaron Kallur and as a fictional character, but this particular blog is asking, is Aaron Kallur based on Mark Zuckerberg in Jason Bourne? The tech giant seems very familiar. There is a lot going on in Jason Bourne, the newest film in the Bourne series. The movie, the fourth or fifth in the series, depends on your opinion of the Bourne legacy, and the first in almost 10 years to star Matt Damon as the titular spy is full of classic Jason Bourne moments. But it isn't just full of super spy action and thrills. In fact, one of the biggest threats posed in the movie comes from social media, more specifically, a Facebook-like site called Deep Dream. That, spoiler alert, the CIA is trying to use to invade people's privacy. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Anyone? Sure sounds familiar to me. Aaron Kallur, the Deep Dream founder, plays a small but important role in Jason Bourne, and his character has a lot of audiences wondering if Jason Bourne's Aaron Kallur is based on Mark Zuckerberg. Now, I'm not going to go and finish this because it's not important to what we're looking at, but I do believe that that is what is being depicted in this movie, the new Jason Bourne movie. Well, it's not new, it's a year old, but you know what I mean. The newest. And that Q is pointing this out because he is pointing out that CIA/Dream, and Dream was the really depicted Facebook in this movie. So what he's saying is that basically Mark Zuckerberg is CIA and Facebook is a CIA front. And I think that most people, if they didn't know that, they at least suspected it. So he ends this with Q. And that's it for this particular post. It's been a very long one. I apologize for it being so long, but I really felt, and in fact, honestly, I could spend several more hours on this because there's a lot here. There's really a lot here. But again, I think that it's important to move past these and get to the newer ones, and we may come back and revisit some of this stuff and as I research more, but that's where we stand for now. I appreciate you guys, like, subscribe, and if you want to be really nice, buy me a coffee. My PayPal is there, and thank you to those who have done so. I appreciate it. I always love coffee money, so it takes lots of coffee to power this research. So anyway, thank you so much. I really do appreciate you all, and I hope you have a very happy Friday and that you get lots done. It's productive, and be safe.